Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. The Midnight Howl. The scorching Utah sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as Josh and his three friends, Ethan, Carly, and Mia, finished setting up their campsite deep in a secluded canyon. The group had planned this summer trip as a way to disconnect from the world and reconnect with each other. Laughter filled the air as they built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and shared ghost stories. The canyon's jagged cliffs and the vast expanse of wilderness around them seemed to echo their joy, making the isolation feel exhilarating. As darkness enveloped the camp, the fire's glow became their only source of light. The conversation began to wane, and the usual sounds of the night took over. Crickets chirping, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the distant hoot of an owl. But then, a sound none of them had expected broke the calm. A low, guttural howl reverberated through the canyon. The group froze. Ethan broke the silence with a nervous chuckle. "Coyotes," he said, shrugging. "They're probably just hunting or something." "Yeah, totally normal," Carly added, though her voice betrayed a hint of unease. Josh nodded, but his eyes lingered on the dark expanse beyond the firelight. There was something unsettling about the howl. It didn't sound quite like a coyote. It was too deep, too deliberate. Still, he didn't want to be the one to spook the group, so he kept his thoughts to himself. As the evening wore on, the howls came again, this time closer. They seemed to move around the campsite, echoing off the canyon walls. Each time, the group's nervous laughter became more strained. By the time the fire had burned low, Josh decided he needed to step away to relieve himself. "Don't wander too far," Mia warned. Her joking tone couldn't mask the genuine worry in her eyes. "I'll be fine," Josh said, grabbing a flashlight. "I'll be right back." He ventured a few dozen yards from the camp, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The night air was cooler now, and the silence felt oppressive. As Josh finished and turned to head back, he caught movement in his peripheral vision. Something, or someone, was crouched near the tree line. The figure was humanoid but wrong. It moved on all fours, its limbs unnaturally long and angular. Josh's breath caught in his throat as the flashlight beam landed on its face. Two glowing yellow eyes stared back at him, unblinking and predatory. The creature's skin was pale and stretched tight over its skeletal frame. Josh stepped back, his heart pounding. The creature tilted its head, studying him. Then, with a sickening crack, it stood upright. "Help me." The voice that came from the creature was Josh's own, but distorted and hollow, as if filtered through a broken speaker. Terror flooded his veins, and he stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. The darkness consumed him, and all he could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat. He bolted back toward the camp, tripping over roots and rocks in his panic. When he burst into the firelight, his friends jumped to their feet. "Josh, what happened?" Carly asked, her voice trembling. Before he could answer, the voice came again. "Help me." It was Josh's voice, but it came from the opposite side of the camp. The group whipped around, their faces pale with fear. "Who's there?" Ethan shouted, grabbing a stick from the fire as a makeshift weapon. The voice repeated, closer this time. Then came the sound of twigs snapping and leaves rustling. Whatever was out there was circling them. "Pack up. We need to go," Josh managed to say, his voice shaking. In a frenzy, they doused the fire and hastily threw their belongings into their backpacks. The howls began again, this time overlapping, as if there were more than one creature surrounding them. The group didn't wait to find out. They sprinted back to their car, the flashlight beams bouncing wildly as they ran. The howls followed them, echoing in the darkness. When they finally reached the vehicle, they piled in, and Ethan floored the gas pedal. As they sped away, Josh dared to look back. For a split second, he thought he saw a pair of glowing yellow eyes watching them from the edge of the road. The next morning, safely back in town, the group sat in a diner, trying to process what had happened. Josh couldn't shake the image of the creature from his mind. He decided to ask a local about the area. An older man sitting at the counter overheard their conversation. He turned to Josh, his weathered face grim. "You were out in the canyons?" the man asked. Josh nodded. "That's sacred land," the man said. "The Navajo call it Skinwalker territory. You're lucky to be alive." Josh felt a chill run down his spine. He'd heard of skinwalkers before, but had always dismissed them as myths. Now he wasn't so sure. "What are they?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man hesitated, then said, "They're witches, shapeshifters. They take on the form of animals or even people to harm those who cross them. The land you camped on, it's cursed." The group left the diner in silence, the weight of the man's words hanging over them. None of them ever spoke of the trip again, but Josh couldn't forget the glowing eyes or the sound of his own voice calling for help in the darkness. Years later, whenever Josh heard a howl in the night, he'd freeze, his mind replaying that terrifying encounter. He knew the stories were true now. The skinwalkers were real, and he had narrowly escaped their grasp. Story 2. The Desert Hitchhiker. Emily was used to late nights. As a night shift nurse, she often found herself driving home while most of the world was fast asleep. The solitude of the empty roads in New Mexico usually brought her a strange sense of peace. But that night, as the clock ticked past 2 a.m., she felt an unease she couldn't quite shake. The moon hung high, casting silver light over the desolate desert highway. Emily had been driving for about 30 minutes when she first saw it, a figure standing by the side of the road, motioning for a ride. Her headlights swept over the figure, revealing a tall silhouette wrapped in what looked like a tattered cloak. She couldn't see the face clearly, but the gesture was unmistakable, a thumb raised in the universal sign of hitchhiking. Something about the figure sent a shiver down her spine. She wasn't the type to pick up strangers, especially not in the middle of nowhere. Without slowing down, she gripped the steering wheel tightly and drove past. Her car's tires hummed against the asphalt as she checked her rearview mirror. The figure stood motionless, shrinking into the distance. "Probably just some traveler," she muttered to herself, though her knuckles remained white on the wheel. The radio played faintly in the background, the soft strains of a late-night talk show filling the silence. But a few miles down the road, her heart nearly stopped. There was again. The same figure stood by the roadside, motioning for a ride. Emily's stomach twisted into a knot. It was impossible. There hadn't been any cars, no turnoffs, no way for someone to get ahead of her. And yet, there they were, their presence as unnerving as it was inexplicable. This time, as her car drew closer, the figure turned its head. The headlights illuminated its face, or rather, the lack of one. It was smooth, featureless, like a blurred photograph that refused to come into focus. Emily's breath hitched, and her pulse quickened. She pressed her foot down on the accelerator, the car lurching forward with a burst of speed. Her radio crackled, the clear signal dissolving into static. The sound filled the car, a grating noise that made her teeth clench. She reached out with one hand to twist the dial, but the static only grew louder, almost as if it were alive, invading the small space of her car. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't real." The desert stretched out around her, an endless expanse of shadow and sagebrush. She dared a glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure standing in the distance. But the road behind her was empty. Relief washed over her for a fleeting moment before something caught her eye. On the passenger side, outside her window, something was moving. She turned her head, and her scream caught in her throat. The figure was running alongside her car, its limbs moving with an unnatural fluidity. Its featureless face remained turned toward her, as if it could see her despite having no eyes. The tattered cloak billowed behind it, and its pace was impossibly fast, matching her car even as the speedometer climbed past 60 miles per hour. Emily's foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, the engine roaring in protest. The figure kept pace, its presence a dark blur in her peripheral vision. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she muttered prayers under her breath, her voice shaky and desperate. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure veered off the road. Emily glanced in the rearview mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. What she saw chilled her to the bone. The figure's form rippled, its outline distorting as if it were made of smoke. It collapsed on all fours, its limbs elongating, reshaping. Within moments, it was no longer humanoid, but a large coyote with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. The creature stood in the middle of the road, watching her car disappear into the distance. Emily didn't slow down. She didn't even think. Her only goal was to get as far away as possible. By the time she reached the safety of her driveway, her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely turn off the ignition. She stumbled out of the car and into her house, locking the door behind her. The events of the night played over and over in her mind, each detail more surreal than the last. The next morning, she told herself it had been a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion and the eerie emptiness of the desert. But deep down, she knew better. Locals often spoke of strange happenings along that stretch of highway, tales of skinwalkers and spirits that haunted the barren lands. Emily had always dismissed them as folklore until now. She never took that route again, and every time she drove through the desert at night, she couldn't help but glance at the roadside, half expecting to see a figure standing there, motioning for a ride. Story 3. The Shape-Shifting Neighbor. Sarah and Mike had been dreaming of a quieter life for years. Their cramped apartment in the city offered nothing but stress, noise, and an ever-growing sense of detachment from the natural world. So when they stumbled upon an affordable farmhouse in rural Arizona, it felt like fate. The house was old but charming, with wide-open fields and towering cacti framing the horizon. For Sarah, it was a painter's dream. For Mike, a place to finally work on his novel. Their nearest neighbor, Tom, lived a few hundred yards away in a small, dilapidated house. Tom was in his late 60s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that seemed to hold too many secrets. Despite his kind demeanor, there was something unsettling about him that Sarah couldn't quite place. "He's just lonely," Mike would say whenever Sarah mentioned it. Give him a break. But there was one thing Sarah couldn't shake. Tom had an odd habit of watching their house at night. She often caught glimpses of him standing in his yard, staring in their direction, a cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. Sarah tried to ignore it, but unease lingered. One chilly evening, as Sarah washed dishes in the kitchen, something moved at the edge of her vision. She looked up and froze. A coyote was standing at their property line, its eyes locked onto hers through the window. It was unlike any coyote she'd ever seen. It was massive, with coarse, matted fur and piercing yellow eyes that felt too intelligent, too knowing. "Mike," she called, her voice shaking. "Come here." Mike joined her, his face creasing in confusion as he followed her gaze. "That's a big one," he muttered, reaching for the flashlight they kept by the back door. When the beam of light swept over the creature, it didn't flinch. Instead, it took a step closer, its movements slow and deliberate. Sarah's stomach churned. "Let's just stay inside," she whispered. Reluctantly, Mike agreed, and they spent the rest of the evening with every curtain drawn. The next morning, Tom showed up unannounced. He leaned on their porch railing, his hat pulled low over his face. "Morning," he greeted them with a thin smile. "You folks doing all right?" Mike nodded. "Yeah, though we had a big coyote hanging around last night. Ever see anything like that around here?" Tom's smile faded. "Yeah, I've seen some strange animals out here. Gotta be careful. They're not always what they seem." Something about the way he said it made Sarah's skin crawl. She noticed a fresh bandage on his leg. "What happened?" she asked, gesturing to it. Tom hesitated, his eyes darting briefly to hers. Just a scrape. Nothing to worry about." He quickly changed the subject, offering to help set up traps around their property. Sarah declined, her instincts screaming that something was off. That night, Sarah and Mike were jolted awake by a loud scratching noise at their bedroom window. Heart pounding, Mike grabbed his shotgun and cautiously approached the window. Sarah followed close behind, clutching her phone with trembling hands. The coyote was back, its massive frame silhouetted against the moonlight. It stood on its hind legs, scratching at the glass like it was trying to get in. Its eyes glowed unnaturally, and its lips curled into what looked horrifyingly like a grin. Mike didn't hesitate. He opened the window just enough to fire a warning shot. The creature let out a guttural snarl before disappearing into the darkness, moving so quickly it seemed almost to vanish. The following morning, Tom's house was eerily silent. Concerned, Mike decided to check on him. He returned a few minutes later, his face pale. "He's gone," Mike said. "The place is empty." Looks like he packed up and left in a hurry. Sarah's unease deepened. She suggested they talk to some locals to get more information about Tom. What they learned sent chills down their spines. An old woman at the general store told them tales of skinwalkers, shape-shifting entities from Navajo folklore, capable of taking on human or animal form. People around here say one used to live nearby, the woman said, her voice hushed. They're drawn to isolated places where they can do their work. Sarah and Mike's blood ran cold. Could Tom have been something more than he seemed? Even after weeks passed, the couple couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. Sometimes, Sarah swore she saw a shadow moving in the distance, just beyond their property line. Mike would dismiss it as paranoia, but deep down, they both knew the truth. Whatever had haunted their nights wasn't entirely gone. They installed cameras, motion lights, and locked their doors religiously. Yet, every so often, the eerie sound of scratching at the windows would return, a chilling reminder that some things, once invited in, never truly leave.